They don't want your love. They need your energy. Carl Jung once recorded something he hesitated to make public. Some people don't show up to love you. They show up to survive. And the ones most easily drained are the empaths, those who carry a soft heart and a radiant light. The terrifying part is that this process is entirely invisible. It unfolds through tears you believed were sincere, through stories of suffering that made you open your heart until you're drained, and you can't explain why. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. C.G. Jung. How can you tell the difference between a relationship that heals and one that is quietly draining you? Stay, here's Jung's map to help empaths flip the script. You're not exhausted because you gave too much. You're exhausted because someone kept taking. Imagine a Friday afternoon. You've just stepped out of the office after a 2-hour meeting. No major drama. No one shouted at you. Yet, your body feels completely drained. A colleague had shared so sincerely about being misunderstood, about how no one listens to them. And you, as always, were the only one who could empathize. You nodded, you listened, you opened your heart, but you also skipped lunch. And now, on the way home, your chest feels heavy as stone. Something isn't right yet. You tell yourself, maybe I'm just too weak. Carl Jung once warned about something he called the unconscious feeding mechanism. It's not that someone maliciously drains you. It's a way of existing they survive by consuming the emotions of others, often from people like you, empaths with sincerity and boundless kindness. These people don't scream, they don't threaten. They come to you with wounds. They don't ask for money, but they make you pay with time, attention, and your inner peace. Every time you're near them, your battery drops, and you're the one unconsciously plugging in the charger for them. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Carl Jung. Look back at the times you felt exhausted. You may realize the fatigue didn't come from giving, but from being taken without acknowledgement. And worse, you were convinced that your very kindness was the reason for your depletion. For example, you're always the listener in the group. When someone breaks up, loses a job, or feels lonely, they call you. But when you need to share, the conversation ends with, hang in there. You don't resent them. Yet something feels missing, as if your kindness only has one-way value. This doesn't mean you should shut your heart. But if you don't learn to recognize when your empathy is being turned into someone else's survival fuel, you'll keep draining yourself and believe it's your responsibility. This is the moment to ask your first question. If not out of love, then why do I keep giving? The deepest wounds wear the mask of love. One of the most frightening paradoxes empaths often fall into is this: the more someone needs you, the more you believe you are being loved. They cry when you're not there. They text you every night. They tell you things they've never shared with anyone. And you believe that if someone can bear their emotions so nakedly in front of you, then surely they must love you. But you forget one crucial truth. Emotional disclosure does not equal love. In psychotherapy, this bond is called a trauma bond, a connection built on unhealthiness. In it, two people are pulled together by wounds left unhealed, not by maturity. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Nietzsche. The person who needs you doesn't always need your heart. They need a way to keep their emotions afloat. And when you help them ease the pain for a moment, they cling to you not out of love, but because you are like a powerful dose of painkiller. When you think you are mending a soul, you may only be extending a chain of dependency. Notice these signs. You are the only one they open up to. But whenever you're hurt, they can't handle emotions right now. Every urgent call from them becomes your top priority. But when you need help, they say, I'm too overwhelmed. They often say, only you understand me. And that makes you feel chosen, special. But here is the trap: your specialness is built on the other person's refusal to grow. You are not being loved. You are being used as a container for their unresolved pain. Carl Jung once described these kinds of relationships as a form of unconscious projection system. The other person doesn't really see you. They see the image of healing they want to attach to you. And they use it to avoid looking at themselves. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Carl Jung. But in a trauma bond, what exhausts you gets labeled as proof of love. So are you in a profound love or trapped in an emotional dependency glorified with sweet words? Pause and ask yourself, when you don't reply right away, do they worry or do they get angry? When you're tired, do they step back or do they demand more? When you set a boundary, do they respect it or act as if betrayed? If love leaves you increasingly depleted, then what you are calling love may actually be in a quiet drain disguised as love. And you know the irony, empaths don't fall into trauma bonds because they are weak. They fall because they want to heal others at all costs. They mistake compassion for duty. They confuse being needed with being important. And they confuse being leaned on with being chosen to love. Within the next 24 hours, recall a relationship that made you feel special, but also left you constantly drained. Write down 3 behaviors of that person, then ask, is this care? Or is it an unconscious strategy to keep me as their emotional outlet? In the next part, you'll discover the step-by-step mechanism unconscious energy parasites use to activate your kindness like a switch, turning you into their main source of energy. You thought you were deeply connected. No, you were being programmed to light up, so someone else could survive. They feed not by force, but by familiarity. Jung once recorded a kind of human interaction that chilled him. Some people don't live by inner effort, but by borrowed energy from others. And what makes it dangerous is this: the draining process doesn't reveal itself through anger or blatant manipulation. It unfolds step by step, as gently as a familiar ritual, until even the one being consumed doesn't realize it. Below are the 4 typical stages in the feeding process of an energy parasite. You may recognize yourself in them, not because you are weak, but because you once mistook them for intimacy. Stage 1. Light recognition. They don't choose you randomly. They recognize the light in you from the first encounter. This is what Jung called a feeling-toned complex. Every person radiates a distinct kind of energy, and empaths shine the brightest in a crowd. You are the one who nods when others speak, the one who notices the smallest changes, the one who senses tension even when no one names it. And they sense it, like a thirsty creature discovering a spring. They are not drawn to you, they need you to survive. Stage 2. Wound display. They approach you not with demands, but with wounds. They tell stories of cold parents, of a betrayed love, of fractures in the soul that no one ever understood. You, with your compassion, begin to open up. You feel, if not me, then who will stay to heal them? But you don't realize the display of wounds does not come with the responsibility to recover. They don't actually go to therapy. They don't change their behaviors. They only learn one thing: telling the right pain story keeps you from leaving. Some wounds are performed, not processed. Stage 3. Empathy activation. This is the critical stage. They start creating crisis chains. Texts at 1 a.m. I don't know how to go on anymore. Back-to-back calls. I just need you to listen. Emotional collapses poured onto you, followed by gratitude as if you were their savior. You feel needed, trusted, but at the same time, you feel your inner space slowly shrinking. When an empath is programmed to respond with kindness, the manipulator doesn't need to attack the assailant, they just need to press the button. Stage 4. Depletion normalization. Over time, exhaustion becomes normal. You start believing love equals endurance, that if you feel drained, it's because you're too sensitive. That sacrifice is the price of deep connection. Jung called this shadow reversal, making their lack look like your flaw when the manipulator shifts their own lack onto you. Then convinces you it's your flaw. You're not too sensitive. You're being drained. You may have gone through all 4 stages, but not because you lacked intelligence. You stayed because you thought you were doing the right thing. But empathy does not mean erasing yourself to keep another alive. Ask yourself, the last time I felt obliged to help, what happened right before? Did someone tell a pain story? Did someone make me feel special for staying? In the next part, you will see 3 common scenarios in love, in family and at work, where energy parasites slip in. Not with toxicity, but with wounds left unilluminated. Because the most dangerous manipulation does not come from the evil. It comes from those who don't realize they are hurting you. Not every wound bleeds. Some smile, cry, and call you every night. You might think an energy drainer would look toxic. But the truth is, they are often the closest ones, the deepest lovers, the most sensitive colleagues. And that is exactly why we sink not from ferocity, but from what we call intimacy. Carl Jung warned that shadow does not only appear in the wicked, it exists even in the wounded when they refuse to face their own lack. Below are 3 typical settings where unconscious energy parasites often appear not through blatant manipulation, but through the saddest stories. 1. The romance trap, when love is an addiction to being needed. Sarah met David at a spiritual retreat. He was quiet, wounded, and deep, exactly the kind of frequency an empath can sense. David spoke of a dark childhood of loneliness no one understood, of nights of depression lying motionless for hours. Sarah felt chosen. She believed her love could heal him. But weeks later, David called in the middle of the night in panic. He threatened to do something reckless if Sarah didn't answer. When she was tired and refused, David accused, "I didn't think you'd be like everyone else." She thought she was being loved. But in truth, she was maintaining psychological stability for a soul refusing to grow. Jung described this kind of interaction as a wound fusion dynamic fusion trauma. One person hands over all emotional responsibility to the other and calls it love. The empath, wanting to do the right thing, stays in the healer role until they have nothing left to give. 2. The devouring mother. When motherhood becomes an endless chain of guilt, Michael was an only child. His mother called every night, speaking of loneliness, recalling the years of sacrifice raising him. Every time Michael didn't answer, she texted, "You must be busy." I'm used to it. When Michael began setting boundaries, she cried, "You're all I have left. If you abandon me too, how can I go on?" He felt like a criminal, though deep inside, he was exhausted. Jung called this the devouring mother archetype, a mother who swallows her child's life with unresolved obsessions and emotions. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parent, Carl Jung. The love in this relationship is real, but it is blended with dependency guilt and unhealthy attachment. 3. The office vampire. When sensitivity becomes a tool to dodge responsibility, Lisa worked in a creative firm. The colleague Jenna always appeared fragile and emotional. In every meeting, Jenna shared her anxieties, pressures, messy family life, and the whole team had to adjust work around her moods. Lisa, ever the listener, the supporter, slowly realized Jenna didn't really want solutions. She wanted an audience, and everyone had been silently trained not to make Jenna feel hurt. The feelings were real, but they were used as a shield to avoid facing responsibility. Jung saw this as a form of projective identification, pushing their feelings into you, so you carry them when someone lacking emotional regulation unconsciously pushes their emotions onto others to avoid processing them. 3 stories, 1 rule: wounds left unilluminated become unconscious weapons to keep others from leaving. And those pulled in are often empaths, because you feel the pain so deeply you can't bear to walk away. You stay not because you're forced, but because you believe it is kindness. But kindness without awareness can become a one-way ticket into chronic depletion. Choose one relationship, romantic/family, work that leaves you drained for no clear reason. Write down 2 emotional behaviors of that person that make you unable to leave. Then ask yourself, if I weren't their rescuer, what meaning would I still have in this relationship? In the next part, you'll dive into the shadow of the empath. Not because you are too good, but because you are addicted to being needed. And that is the silent shadow Jung warned. If left unseen, you will be consumed by your own kindness. What if being needed is your favorite drug? Have you ever asked yourself, are you truly empathic? Or are you simply unable to bear being forgotten? That question sounds harsh, but it is a necessary mirror. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For those with empathic hearts, the hardest truth to accept is this, that sometimes you help not out of love, but out of fear of being worthless." Do you notice you only feel useful when you're doing something for others? Have you ever felt lost when no one needed you? If you've ever been there, you're not alone. But do not ignore it. Jung called this the shadow of the healer, the shadow of the wounded healer, a subtle dependency addiction to being needed. They need to be saved. You need to be needed. An invisible contract is signed. No one speaks. No one takes responsibility. But one thing is clear. You are giving in order to keep your place in someone's life. Ask yourself, when no one asks for your advice, do you feel sad when others overcome struggles without you? Do you feel left out? When you set boundaries, do you fear being seen as heartless? If so, be honest. Maybe you are not only living on kindness, you are living on a role. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Jung, if you haven't faced the shadow of being good, it will govern your relationships. You will stay in places that drain you just to avoid facing the truth. You don't know who you are if you are not the one being needed. And when you live this way, you become the ideal energy source for those who cannot sustain their own emotions. You think you are loving. In reality, you are trying to prove you still matter. Next time you're about to help someone, pause for 10 seconds and ask, am I truly choosing to help? Or am I just afraid of being forgotten if I'm not here to fix things? Will I still feel important? You don't need to save everyone to be worthy of love. You only need to learn how to be present without erasing yourself. In the next part, you'll learn how to protect your light without freezing your heart. Because empaths don't need to become cold. They just need awareness while they give. Not all wounds scream. Some whisper 2 days later. There are wounds that don't show up right away. They don't stab. They don't bleed. They just seep in silence. And often you won't notice what happened until 24 or 48 hours after a conversation that seemed harmless. The next morning, you wake up, not exactly tired, not exactly well. Your body isn't falling apart, but your head feels heavy. Your heart doesn't hurt, yet nothing feels appealing. Everything turns blurry, as if a thin fog covers your mind, keeping you from seeing inside yourself clearly. No one insulted you. There was no argument, no serious event. It's just that you no longer feel like yourself. I used to think that state came from lack of sleep, from work pressure. But the more I paid attention, the more I saw. It only appeared after I interacted with a certain kind of person. Carl Jung called this the consequence of energetic bleeding, a leakage of energy that happens after interactions that look normal. It doesn't occur at the moment of contact. It reveals itself only after you've left them, when your body has returned, but your soul is still stuck somewhere. You think you're fine. But hours later, or even a whole day, you begin to feel sluggish for no clear reason. Have a brain that feels like it's swimming in mud. Losing focus, struggling with simple tasks. Sense that you're not good enough, even though no one said so. Become irritable or uneasy without knowing why. Replay a story in your head over and over, without finding a way out. What just happened? In truth, your energy was taken without your knowing. Not through violence or scolding, but through a kind of sweet connection, neatly wrapped in confiding empathy, even. Pain. Jung once described this phenomenon as a kind of unconscious gaslighting, where people don't manipulate you with words, but with their very wounds. What makes it dangerous is this: you won't trust your inner signals, because you think that person just needs someone to share with. You tell yourself, it's nothing, I'm just too sensitive. But if it's like this every time, maybe you're not too sensitive. You're just being more honest with your body. An image once burned itself into me. Every time I walked away from those interactions, I felt like a candle under a glass dome. No one snuffed me out. Yet I still dimmed. No one harmed me. Yet I still faded inside. The real question you need to examine isn't did they mean it, but rather, why do I feel less of myself after being around them? Not everyone who speaks gently is a wholesome person. Not everyone who tells a story of hurt is truly healing. And the absence of drama does not equal a safe relationship. Jung said, your vision becomes clear when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. You don't need to wait for anyone to confirm what you already know. You just need to relearn how to hear the voice your body and emotions are whispering. Watch yourself 1-2 days after each encounter with someone who leaves you unsettled. You don't need a logical reason, only honesty. Do you feel clearer or murkier, brighter or dimmer, settled or drifting? If the fatigue arrives and you can't explain it, the reason lies exactly where you're afraid to look. The energetic frequency you just unknowingly opened and let someone else access. In the next part, you'll get a self-protection map that the light method, a system that helps empaths keep their light without closing their hearts. Protection is not rejection, it's precision. You don't need to become cold to be safe. You only need awareness when you open your heart. Jung once wrote, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. To become an awakened empath, you must learn to look within before you attempt to heal others. That is when you need to activate your energetic immune system, a spiritual shield that helps you keep your light. Without building walls. I call it the light method, composed of 5 steps. L. Listen to your energy. I. Integrate your shadow. G. Guard your space. H. Honor your nature. T. Transform pain into power. Listen to your energy. Empaths don't lack emotion. We lack discrimination, what is ours and what belongs to others. Your body is a radar. You always know, but you rarely trust that feeling. So the first step is relearn how to listen to yourself. Ask yourself after each encounter, do I feel lighter or heavier? Am I calm inside or tangled? Is my energy rising or leaking? The initial blur is the compass pointing the way. Listen to it instead of brushing it off. I. Integrate your shadow. The more you try to be a good person, the easier you become prey for those who can perform their pain. Jung called this the wounded healer complex, the unhealed wounds of the one who goes around healing. Ask yourself honestly, am I helping others because they truly need it, or because I'm afraid of being left behind? Do I choose love? Or am I afraid that no one will need me? It's not about discarding kindness. It's about making it conscious. Unconscious kindness makes you manipulable. Kindness with shadow becomes a light with direction. G. Guard your space. Not everyone is entitled to enter your energetic field. Being accessible is not the same as being available. You don't owe anyone your listening. You don't owe anyone your time. You don't owe anyone access to your heart. Just because they're in pain, set boundaries like a gardener. You don't close the gate out of hatred, but because you're tending something sacred within. H. Honor your nature. You don't need to apologize for being sensitive. You don't need to hide your depth. The more you try to normalize yourself, the more you attract those who want to consume what you're hiding. Jung called this individuation, becoming who you truly are, not a copy of what society wants. You are light, but if you don't respect it, others will step in and unconsciously snuff it out. T. Transform pain into power. Pain doesn't make you weaker. It only becomes a burden when you don't know where to place it. An awakened empath doesn't try to avoid pain. They learn to turn pain into sharp perception, no longer running from wounds, but using them like a blade to cut away connections that make them smaller. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Jung, you don't have to burn out to prove you have a heart. You only need to learn to give love without melting yourself away. The light method won't make you hard. It helps you become a light with a spine. In the next part, you'll see what Jung warned about. When you begin protecting your energy, those who once lived off that light will react. They won't disappear. They escalate. And you must learn how to face that eruption without losing the awareness within. When you stop feeding the shadow, it screams louder. There is a cruel paradox. The more you awaken, the more the shadows in others panic. Not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped doing what was right for them, giving them energy, giving them endurance, giving them access. Jung once described this with a chilling image. The shadow does not disappear when you see it. It fights harder to survive. And he called this reaction extinction burst, the final thrash before an old behavior dies out. You may have lived through this without naming it. You begin setting boundaries. You start saying no. You're no longer always available to absorb, no longer there every time they need. And then they change. But not in the way you hoped. The one who once called you the light of their life now says, "You're too selfish." The one who once texted, "You're the only one who understands me," now asks, "Are you even yourself anymore?" The one who once used wounds to bind to you now uses those same wounds to accuse you of pulling away. That's when you meet the extinction burst. An emotional panic from the other side because they just lost their familiar food source you. Where do you see this? Someone who once manipulated you with sadness now threatens self-harm. A dependent romance turns to sarcasm, belittling you in front of others. A family member who once guilt-tripped you now says you've changed. You don't love me anymore. You once believed that if you were good, people would be good back, but extinction burst proves the opposite. When you are no longer delicious to consume, those who live by dependency reveal themselves. Not because they are evil, but because they are used to surviving like creatures needing outside light. They will escalate. They will say the most cutting words. They will use every memory that once softened you to break you down. And they will replay their wounds as a ticket back into your life. I was once called heartless for refusing to let a friend trauma dump at 2 a.m. I was once told by an ex that I had lost my soul just because I no longer replied instantly whenever they felt empty. Back then, I didn't know what this was. I only knew. I felt guilty, felt that I was too hard, no longer myself. But no, I was returning to myself. That guilt was their shadow trying to keep me tethered. Jung once warned, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And the first truth you must accept is that not everyone will celebrate when you begin to love yourself. Extinction burst is proof that you are evolving. The shadow in others only thrashes when it senses you're no longer easy to exploit. And that escalation is the pain of transformation. Don't retreat. Don't apologize for boundaries. Hold your ground and read it as a signal you've pulled the plug. Some people loved you most when you had no boundaries. There are relationships that only existed while you endured. There are compliments that only came when you complied. There are gazes that softened only when you shrank. Jung once wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But in energy-dependent relationships, only one side transforms, and that side is you. You shrink so the other can breathe. You erode so they can feel enough. You dull yourself so they don't feel glare. That is not love. That is self-compromise in exchange for acceptance. Do you dare to be misunderstood, to be called cold, arrogant, heartless in order to keep your light? Do you dare to no longer fit the image someone once pasted on you to become something truer? A sovereign empath is not someone who transcends wounds. They are the ones who hold boundaries, even while being slandered, shunned, or misunderstood. I remember the first time I cut a bond with someone who was once my spiritual twin flame. We spoke every day. He shared every depression, every fractured dream, every childhood wound. And I was always there, every time without fail. Until one day I realized I was no longer the one speaking. I was only the one receiving. I said, "Oh, I need space." He smirked and said, "I knew it. You're just like everyone else now. Painful, deeply painful. but also deeply true. You will see it everywhere. A manipulative mother breaks her heart when you say you can't answer every night. A friend suddenly unfriends you after you refuse to loan them more energy. A community that once worshipped you as a healer turns away when you begin saying no. But you know what? That very moment of being unliked is the test of whether you are truly living as yourself. Jung never encouraged selfishness, but he warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. If you don't clarify your inner motives, you may be using kindness as a subtle way to be loved. And so, a sovereign empath is one who dares to walk through the land of being disliked to find themselves beyond the approval of others. They are not cold. They are simply awake enough to know not everyone who reacts to your boundaries deserves your energy. And strangely, it is only when you stop trying to be loved that you finally meet those who can love you for real. Those who don't need your pain to feel close. Those who don't sneeze their wounds onto you and call it connection. Those who regulate their own energy and come not to consume, but to shine alongside you. Sovereign empaths are not lonely. They are selective. They don't have many bonds. But each one is real. Each one is clean. Each one doesn't demand they disappear so someone else can exist. If you are on that path, know this, you are not wrong. You are simply leaving the noise to enter clarity. Some may not walk with you, but the light you keep is the only thing that can lead you to your whole self. In the final part, you will look back at this entire awakening journey with one single question. Do I choose light or being loved by others? And you will find the answer, not in logic, but in the silence of your heart. You already have the map. Empaths are not weak. They just haven't learned how to hold their light without burning out. Your light is not fuel for others' darkness. It's illumination for your own path. And perhaps the bravest act is not healing someone else, but daring to keep yourself even when others no longer like that self. Write down one choice I choose to keep my light, or I do not apologize for having boundaries. And if you've ever felt, the more I awaken, the more I lose the ones I love stay. Because the next video will show you how not to be alone on the awakening journey. No longer a source of supply, but a sun strong enough to hold its own orbit. See you in the next layer of your light.